Okay, I'm gonna pause you for a second. I gotta readjust this just a little bit. Welcome back to part 2 of us telling our whole story of why we left the church. And we are sparing no details, so that's why we had to break this up in several videos. So, here we go back into where we left off. I remember thinking, okay, he'll figure it out, everything will be fine. And then things just started to escalate over time because I started to see him being a lot more withdrawn at church and like not wanting to go. And he would bring certain things up, but he did a really good job of it. You were really careful about the way you bring things up because you would never be like, oh, Joseph Smith was terrible, da 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 da, because that would make me really defensive, and then I'd be like, oh, I guess we're getting divorced or whatever. But instead, you'd be like, well, I read this thing, like I remember you talking about the angel with the flaming sword and all that when it was like our second or third year of marriage by then. And, anyway, and I remember, like, thinking, well, he's just really sincere, so I wasn't, like, scared of you talking about it, but it still was just like, oh, I think you're just looking at it wrong, or you're just thinking too much into it, or whatever. Yeah, so things, I think, started to escalate because you were having a harder and harder time, like, pretending to want to be a part of church, and I was getting more and more scared and more clingy of, like, you need to shape up. I don't know, do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was, I got to the point where I was, like, most days just walking home, because we lived right by the church, so I just walked to the apartment after sacrament meeting and hang out for a little while and then go back at the end of the day. And we'd go home, and there was always something different. Like, you'd be like, why is the heat on or whatever? Did you come back? I was like, yeah, I did. And didn't feel good, I guess.
Whoops. That was hard.
Yeah.
It was a really hard time for both of us because I feel like there was this dynamic of, like, I was very, like, I did everything right in my life. And so why is this happening to me? Like, why is my husband, like, not able to believe? And I was very, like, angry. Like, not at Jared, but I was, like, angry at the situation. Because I felt, like, gypped. Like, this was all I wanted my whole life was, like, a priesthood guy to be my husband and, like, you know, like, we could be a team, like, Team Jesus and all that. And so I was feeling, like, super angry and frustrated, and he was feeling bad because he felt like, I mean, I don't know, like, you probably felt like you weren't, like, good enough for me in my eyes.
Well, honestly, I felt like I was too good for you.
Oh, my God.
No, I understood how you would feel, because that means that you're losing your eternal companion.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you go by strict Mormon doctrine, it would be justifiable to leave your spouse over that.
Oh, man.
Because you have to do what God wants you to do. And the thing God wants you to do the most is get married to another Mormon dude so you can go to the celestial kingdom. So,
yeah.
I was more worried about that. Than anything, really.
So I remember feeling like, I mean, just devastated and lonely. And, like, I missed talking about, like, church things. 'Cause I felt like I couldn't talk to Jared about church things as he was pulling away more because I felt like he would judge me because he was thinking a lot different. And then it started even becoming hard when you would come to church with me because, like, I tried to kind of stop pressuring him after a while. So then sometimes, like, in the morning I'd be getting ready for church and he'd come, and sometimes he wouldn't. And I would try to, like, not make a big deal about it. But I started, like, I started almost not wanting him to come because I'd be sitting there, like, worrying about what he's hearing. Like, is this going to bring him back, or is this going to bother him, or is this, So then I was like, I can't even enjoy church because this sucks. And, I remember that it just started to really take a toll on us, like, emotionally and mentally. It was really hard to communicate because we just felt like we were on two different pages, and it was just really not fun, honestly. And it wasn't, like, all bad, but, like, it was not a time that I miss. Like, I feel like we're so much better now. I don't really remember, like, at what point you were like, I'm donezo, because it was all so gradual, I felt like. And it wasn't gradual for you, but it was gradual for me, because you were, like, spoon-feeding me these details and pretty much hiding the fact that you were on the ex-mormon subreddit and listening to all these podcasts and doing all that. And this was all taking place, like, 2013 to 2015. And I was in college. You were in college for a little bit, and then you were doing some other training stuff, and then you got a job. Anyway, so let's see. I really don't remember at what point you were, like, out, but I just remember it was, like, a gradual thing that just made me more and more upset the more I realized how real it was. And I remember I kept praying and hoping that, like, you would come back, like, and that we could be happy again. Because I think in my brain, like, I associated, like, being in the church with family togetherness, because that's where my family fell apart. Was like my dad left the church and then my parents got divorced at the same time. It wasn't because of him leaving the church, but in my mind, it was hard to separate that. Yeah, it just sucked. It was really hard, and it was hard for you. It was not fun. Anyway, so we get to a point where we are buying our first house together back in 2016. I had just graduated from college, and Jared had a pretty nice job by then, and so we were thinking of buying a house, and I remember that we had already, like, signed a lot of the paperwork and stuff, and the house was going through its, for sale process, and we were talking about, like, what the rules of the house would be, and I was, like, really not wanting alcohol in the house at all. And by this point, Jared had a lot of friends and stuff that he would drink with, and I was, like, pretty avid that I didn't want alcohol in the house, and he was like, that's not cool, bro. And
well, I was like, I get it for a bit, but eventually I'm gonna want to have that choice.
Right. And so then at that point, like, our arguing had just been getting worse. Like, I feel like until that point, and it just escalated, and we were just done. We were just frustrated, and we got to this point where we saw, like, where this was headed. We were like, if we keep arguing like this, and we can't be on the same page, and neither of us are willing to compromise, like, then, like, this is not going to end well. Like, this is going to end in divorce. And I think as soon as we realized that, it made us, like, whoa, like, and it kind of made us take a step back and reevaluate, like, our relationship and what we want. And I feel like, for me, like, I finally was like, wait a second, like, I don't want to divorce him just because he's not Mormon. And that, like, clicked something in my brain to be like, okay, I'm just going to love him for him, because that's enough for me. Like, if he's not Mormon, that's okay with me. And like, once I, like, kind of made that decision, and I feel like on your end, you kind of were like, I don't know, recommitting yourself to me, and, like, realizing that, like, you had to really give it your all, like,
yeah,
and I don't know, from there, I feel like things got so much better, because I stopped trying to bring you back, and you were just, I don't know, a lot more vocal about your feelings and willing to give me whatever I needed space-wise and everything. And then we just, like, started to rebuild our ability to communicate again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I forgot to say that once you were out, and I was super devastated, I went to a bunch of my friends and was like, what do I do? And they were all like, well, you need to divorce him. And I was just like, what? Like, I thought they'd be like, well, you know, just hang in there. Like, you don't know, maybe he'll come back. Da-da-da. And, like, a bunch of my friends were like, no, you need to divorce him because first he leaves and then he starts drinking and then he's into prostitutes. And I was just like, I like, even then, like, even when we were having a hard time, I was like, Jared's crazy about me. Like, he really likes me. Like, I feel like he's really committed to me. So hearing them say that to me, like, felt absurd. And it bothered me. It actually made me mad. Like, it made me want to defend you.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that actually started to probably crack my shelf, too. Because I was like, wait a second. Like, that's ridiculous advice. Like, oh, he believes different than you? Kick him out. But I understand where that comes from. Because it's like, well, if your eternity depends on this marriage, then yeah, makes sense.
And they're also wrong about the order. It's prostitutes, drinking, cocaine, then leaving the church.
Oh my gosh. You would know. Okay, so anyway, so then we kind of recommitted to each other. Then we started to learn a little bit better about how to communicate, how to talk through things, and I learned better to trust you more with, like, me talking about spiritual things that meant things to me, and I felt like you were just really respectful. And then it was, so that was in 2016 in October. So then 2017 in October, I remember I was getting my Temple Recommend. And so I was being interviewed by my stake president. And my stake president was like, so how are you? And I'm all like sobbing, like, I'm fine, but my husband's out and it's really hard. And he was just like, the only thing that will bring your husband back is the Book of Mormon. You need to talk to him about the Book of Mormon. And I thought, well, he's inspired. Like, he's obviously inspired because he's the stake president. So, like, he's, you know, he's listening to God for me. So I remember that's when I started talking to you more about church issues. So by then, let's see, we had been married. We got married 2013, so we'd been married like 4 years by that point.
Yeah.
And you had fed me little bits here and there, but this is where things really started to escalate. So then I went to Jared, and I remember it was like at some point that week, I just casually brought it up, and I was like, so if you don't believe the church is true, then what's up with the Book of Mormon? And my head, I was like, got him. Like, he doesn't have an answer for this. And oh boy, was I wrong. Do you remember some of the explanations you gave at that point?
Oh, I didn't. Like, you were asking specifically about whether or not it was historical, basically. Like, what do you say about all these, like, civilizations and stuff like that? And I was like, well, I don't think that happened. And I was trying to be nice about it. I didn't want to come off as attacking, because by now we had learned to detach our emotions from our beliefs.
Yes.
And so when I was, talking about it, I didn't get angry about the Book of Mormon. This is what I think. Take it or leave it. And
I remember,
because you said, but what about those people that existed? And I was like, well, there's just no record or evidence that they ever existed. There's all these things that the Book of Mormon says they had that didn't exist back then. Chariots, horses, steel, all the anachronisms that everybody's probably familiar with already. I think that's what I said, right?
Well, I remember, too, that you said, well, there's, like, these... Because I remember asking, like, well, how did he write the Book of Mormon if, like, the church isn't true? He couldn't write it from God. How did he write it? And you were like, well, there's different theories, and like you brought up the Spalding and like a couple theories, and you're like, I don't really know much about these theories, but there's theories out there, and I was just like, what? Like, I remember being like, what do you mean? Like, I remember being really shocked. Like, because I honestly thought, when I brought up the Book of Mormon stuff, you would say something like, well, he just copied it from the Bible, or he just made it up, or whatever. And then I was going to be like, but he only had a 4th grade education. And I was going to, like... Anyway.
See, I don't like how apologists frame that, because they'll always tell you the amount of days it took him to translate the Book of Mormon. Like, how could he come up with entire civilizations in his mind in just those amount of days? It's like, do you understand anything about the creative process? I mean, do you think that J.K. Rowling, had no idea what she was going to write about, just sat down and said, wizards, and then started writing? No, she had these ideas for a long time, probably. Like, I had storylines in my head that I played out. He told stories a lot as a little kid, so I hate that apologists try to say, well, how else could he have written a book in just 60 days or whatever it was? It wasn't 60 days. He had his whole life to think of these things.
Right, yeah. And so I remember just being shocked that you had, like, answers. Like, so from there, like, I just started asking you more and more questions, like, because I kept thinking, like, I'm gonna find something that you don't have an answer to. Like, so I brought up the witnesses, I brought up, like, all these different things, like, and temple stuff, and it just seemed like for everything I brought up, Jared always had an answer. And I was just shocked. I was just like, what? But the thing is, I wasn't super open to hearing about it, except for the fact that you were remaining so calm and so, like, detached. Because I'd be like, well, what about this? And you'd be like, well, some people think this, some people think this, some Mormons say this. And you kind of present, like, all the sides. Like, you'd be like fair Mormon for me. Like, and that made me feel less attacked, which actually started to, like, break my shelf, like, started to break my testimony or my belief in the church, like, kind of, like, secretly, because I didn't realize it was happening. And so then, fast forwarding to February of 2018, then I remember I was, like, getting ready for church. And up until this point, we'd had these little conversations, but I'd be like, oh, okay, well, thanks for telling me that. Like, I wouldn't make a big deal about it. I would just kind of go sit and think about it. And I wouldn't research anything because I was too scared that he was either making this stuff up or looking at bad sources or whatever. But by February 2018, I was super pregnant, and I was just like, I was getting ready for church, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, all of a sudden I was feeling the weight of my shelf, like, metaphorically, like, of all my doubt, like, just starting to crack. And I was, like, terrified. And at this point, I felt so guilty, even just, like, admitting that I had some doubts. And so I remember, like, having, like, a total mental breakdown and crying to you and being like, I don't want to go to church. Like, all this stuff is, like, freaking me out, but I feel so guilty. I feel so guilty even just admitting that some of this stuff is starting to bother me. And you were probably just like, what were you thinking?
Well, I don't know. The only way you can make that mixed faith marriage work is if you get to the point where you say, I don't care if this person stays Mormon the rest of her life, I'm gonna still be with her. So
right, which is what I did for you.
Yeah. So I had to think, I had already established that in my mind that, okay, she's probably gonna be Mormon forever, and that's gonna be fine. So when you express doubts, part of me just thought it's probably nothing. But then the other part was like, if it's something you can't do what you want to do. You can't push this, right? Like,
you mean you can't push me into leaving?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like your reaction as the ex-mormon is going to be like, okay, let me tell you about all this other shit.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And I was like, you can't do that. You just let her learn this stuff. She can come to you and ask you about it if she wants. But you've got to be okay if she decides, no, I'm going to stay in the church. And so...
Yeah. That must have been hard for you.
It wasn't really all that hard because we were in a good place at that point. And we were to a point where I was like, oh, this is fine. If it's like this for the rest of our lives, that's fine.
Yeah, because we really were communicating so much better, and like we just were connecting, and it was like there was just a respect on both sides, and it was like we don't agree, and that's okay. And it was awesome. Like our marriage got so much better even before I had ever questioned. So we had like a while of that kind of good marriage time while we were still, I was very in and he was very out. So anyway, I had like this mental breakdown, and I was like, I'm scared, but then I was like, even though I'm scared, I don't really know what to think, like, I'm gonna get answers to these questions, and I'm gonna, like, become the best Mormon ever, because I'm gonna figure this all out, and I'm gonna realign myself with my faith. I remember particularly some of the things that were cracking my shelf at the time had a lot to do with the nature of God, and a lot less to do with some of the things that you had been bringing up. Because I started, like, when Jared left, everyone was like, oh, he's going to be this awful, terrible person, da-da. And I was like, actually, no, he's really loving and really good husband and really nice friend. And so it started to make me wonder, like, wait a second, would God really be, like, mad at Jared? Because he, in my mind, like, ex-Mormons were always this, like, evil, like, out to get you kind of, like, rawr. And you weren't like that. You were someone who had sincere concerns, sincere questions, and sincere problems that, like, people weren't taking real seriously. I remember I had gotten to that point where I was, like, even defensive of you, where people would be like, oh, so sorry that your husband's out. Like, he'll come back. And I'd be like, there's nothing wrong with him. He's fine. I'd get mad. I'd be like, excuse me? Maybe your husband will leave. No, I was just kidding. I get defensive of you because I was like, he is great the way he is. So it really did shift. Like, you shifted so much in my mind about what an ex-Mormon is. And even just about alcohol. Like, realizing, like, oh, Jared drinking, like, at first I was terrified and I hated it and it was awful and it was a big point of contention. But then, like, the more I was, like, around it, I was like, oh, this is, like, not a big deal. And, like, I was like, oh no, I'm getting desensitized to sin. But then I was like, wait, would God really care if someone, like, thought alcohol wasn't a big deal and was drinking? And so, like, these questions started to spiral in my mind. What does God really think? Like, I'd never thought that before in my life, but I was like, what does God really think? Because some of these rules are not making sense to me. And, like, I had an aunt who was out of the church for years, and all of my experiences with her were super positive, and she was, like, super loving and, like, caring to people and, like, helping people who were having a hard time with church stuff. And I was just like, I don't think God is upset with her. And I was like, but, like, everything I'm being taught is that he is. And so I was, like, at this crossroads, and I was, like, scared, and I was really confused, and so much of it was on the nature of God. Because, again, I wasn't really exposed to a lot of negative church history at this point. Just little bits and pieces Jared had fed me. Which I was like, play me, whatever. Just kidding. So, anyway. So then, May, our first son was born, our only son, our only child. He was born, and by that point, I was like, I am so scared that the church is not true. And I am also so scared that it is. And by that point, I still don't think I had done any of my own research, but I had started asking you a lot more questions, and you started to answer. And you were good. You never pushed it on me, but when I would ask, you would answer like, well, this is what I read from this book and whatever, or this website. And so I started learning more things, like in addition to my issues with the nature of God, I started learning all this stuff about church history slowly, and was just like, whoa, like things were starting to unravel, and I was just like, what is going on? And I kept thinking like, I'm going to find an answer, I'm going to figure this out and come back and be faithful, but it just kept tumbling. I just kept tumbling and spiraling. And so then our son was born, and I got super depressed. And so this was 2018. I remember just a year ago, 2018, November, I was like, by this point, I was like, I think the church might not be true, but I'm terrified that I could be wrong. I was so scared that God would like be mad at me, and that like my family would all hate me, and that it would just be terrible. So it was an awful time. Like last year, that like those months of just feeling depressed, it was just horrendous. So anyway, so then I eventually like started to just do more research, listen to more podcasts, like, and things like that. I remember it wasn't until like January, February of 2019 that I listened to Mormon Stories for the first time. And it was, do you remember?
It was Todd Phillips.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you haven't listened to his Mormon Stories interview with John Dehlin, I highly recommend it. And I think what it made me realize all over again, like I had realized with you and my aunt, was that ex-Mormons aren't these scary, evil people. Like, they're actual people just like me, who loved the church, who served in the church, who had great experiences in the church, and had actual legitimate concerns and frustrations that they didn't understand. They were real people, and they were good people. And that, so to his interview in particular, I was just like, oh my gosh, he was like a real person like me, and just had real questions, and those questions didn't get answered. And so like he changed his way of thinking, and it just made it all so like, human instead of like evil. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that just felt like it gave me even more permission to, to disagree, honestly, to not agree with certain things I was being taught. I remember gay marriage in particular was something that really bothered me too, when I was questioning the nature of God a lot, because I was like, I don't see why God would be offended by two dudes doing it. I don't know. Like,
Well, I don't know what to tell you. That's what the Bible says. So, yeah.
Like, I mean, that's not my cup of tea, but that's someone's cup of tea, and why would God be, like, offended by that? Like, it just seems like when you start to look at all the little rules that the church set up for you, like coffee and tea and garments and all these little things, you're just like, is God just, like, really petty? Like, what's with all these little weird things? And, like, you're not allowed to go to the temple over a cup of coffee or, like, a tattoo or, like, things like that. And it just, like, all these things just really led to my shelf being broken. And I think the thing that really finally broke my shelf, and I've talked about it in previous episodes, but was learning about certain things about Joseph Smith and about his money-digging excursions before starting the church, which, and those kind of things really, like, broke it for me, like, finally, I think, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is it, like, that's it. He was not convicted, but he was, what is it, put on trial for doing these con man kind of things.
I can't remember exactly what all. He was in trouble pretty often for all that stuff.
Right. Anyway, we're not historians, so I'm not going to try to get into it too much. But learning about that really shattered it for me. So, so then I was like, okay, I guess And I mean, along the way, I had already started the channel because I started this YouTube channel back in November 2018 because I was like, pretty sure it's not true. But if you watch some of my older videos, you can hear where I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I don't think it's true, but I could be totally wrong. Like, I was very much not sure, which is kind of cool to go back and watch that. Anyway, so then I was like, then I was out. And then we were both out, so. And so then fast forwarding to where we are now, this year has been really hard for me just because it's been a huge adjustment. This year I feel like has been awesome for you because you're like excited all the time, like, oh, Morgan's gonna drink with me, or Morgan's gonna do this, or whatever, like, oh, we don't have to go to church, and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, not going to church is pretty nice.
Right. Which you weren't really going to church with me anyway, but, I mean, you'd go occasionally. Anyway, so then, where we're at now, do you want to just touch, like, briefly on, like, any beliefs that you've kind of landed on? Like, it doesn't have to be anything intricate.
Basically, I worship Satan.
Yeah, see, that's what most people think, and it's true.
Who else would I worship? Where would I go?
Where else will you go?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I don't think that I'll ever attach myself to an ism again. I like the ideals of individualism, but that's a whole different... It's not really a religion. I'm relatively convinced that there's some sort of a driving force behind the universe, you know? I don't believe in, like, the Bible or anything like that. I think it's a very, very valuable piece of literature, and I don't think its ideas should be discounted as easily as we have in the past discounted them, you know? But I don't think that God wrote it. And even if he did, the Mormons were right. Like, it was translated so many times that it lost a lot of meaning. I mean, I don't believe, like, that the earth is 6,000 years old. I'm not into...
I believe in science.
I believe in science. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I feel like I'm still so fresh into this. There's a lot of spiritual exploration I'm doing. But for a while there, I kind of was like, oh, church isn't true. And I was like, well, but maybe Christianity is cool. And then I was like, oh, I don't know about some of this because I really think, I don't know, some of my opinions are just not aligning with this. And, like, I would like to think if God is real, he's all about love. And anyway, so then I was like, well, maybe there is no God. And I was kind of like tiptoeing in atheism for a bit. And I was like, I want to believe in God, but there's just no way. And then I was like doing a lot of soul searching. And then I was like, oh, no, God's cool. We're cool. That's pretty much my transformation. So now where I'm at is like, I like to believe in God, and I don't practice any kind of religion. I don't see myself ever joining a church again, but I'm very happy with kind of this hopeful, like, yeah, maybe there's someone up there that cares. I don't know, just still exploring, still learning, still on this journey of life. So I guess that's it, bros. I guess that's the whole shebang. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please drop some comments below if you have any questions about our journeys or any thoughts that resonated with you from this video. And we will see you guys in the next video.